Chip Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into this week's episode.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm Zach Shaw, here as always with James Split Suit Sweeney. How are you doing today, sir?
Not too bad. How are you?
Doing okay, hanging in there, holding it down. It'd be remiss not to mention what's going on in the world right now, obviously with the coronavirus impacting us on so many levels, and certainly poker is no exception. I know that we've been watching it closely and seeing a lot of developments, seeing a lot of people obviously moving to online poker now that many casinos are closed. Have you been seeing the same sort of thing?
So being in Mississippi, I'm not seeing it just because I'm not around as much. But, you know, following the news in terms of Vegas, like Vegas is just like completely closed down at this point, which is just crazy. And I don't know, it's scary times. I normally don't like to talk about like real timely events on the podcast because it feels so silly when someone listens to it a couple of years later and it's like, what are they talking about? Like that was forever ago. But this thing is so big, like, I don't know. I don't think it's going anywhere. I don't think people are going to forget about this for a long, long time, even if it, you know, if and when it does get kind of past us. It's scary times. It's weird. Very, very strange.
It's definitely going to be one of those life-defining events, and we're all going to sort of remember this time and, you know, leave it to the experts and so many of the other people to sort of talk about what's going on in our little world here in the poker community. You know, obviously lots of talk of the World Series of Poker being canceled, although that hasn't happened yet.
Yep.
You know, going forward, do you see that there's going to be a major shift of players going from live to online just out of necessity?
I think in the short term, for sure. I mean, especially with all of the casinos closing, and it's not even clear how long they're going to be closed for, right? Because, you know, there's just so much news, and I don't want to get into like speculation and all that, but it's very reasonable to think that this, if there is like a nationwide quarantine in the US, and we've already seen quarantines elsewhere in the world, it might not be as short as people want it to be, and it might be a good idea that people, especially like higher risk individuals, quarantine a little bit longer, because flattening the curve doesn't mean that, you know, we stay in the house for a month and all of a sudden it's gone. Right, it just means it delays, it gives a little bit more time, both for testing on the medical side of things and all that fun stuff, and help the hospitals not get completely overloaded. But I think there's going to be definitely a temporary or a short-term push from live players having to go online in order to keep playing. And in the long term, I think you're going to see a bigger and bigger push for that. And as always, I wish the U.S. would kind of just get their heads out of their asses and get online legalized and regulated and good to go. Even if it's just, you know, an American-only player pool, that's still far better than what we currently have. And I mean, it's a great solution for what we currently have and the problems that are currently existing for live players. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, poker is just in a really, really tough state right now because live play is, you know, all but canceled for a minimum a month as far as I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking just earlier today I was talking with some of the people who were in my home game. We have a regularly scheduled game for next week. And though we canceled this time, you know, we're trying to keep it alive somehow, whether that's by going online and using, you know, pokerstars.net or, you know, some sort of private home game thing that we set up, or
Yep.
Or maybe even just, you know, as we are in isolation for a while and, you know, we can be very sanitized. Maybe we can have a 6-max game where we stay very far apart from each other. I don't know. We're going to take it day by day here.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as always, with something like this, like you said, I think it is going to be a very defining time in our nation, whether it's a shorter term thing that we all learn a lot from or a longer term thing. I think there are going to be quite a few casualties from Corona. And I think it's very important to be sensitive about this. This is going to be, you know, rough times. There are going to be a lot of people that are affected either directly or tangentially through deaths of this. So I think be kind, you know, think about the people that are around you. That's why I'm glad to see that the live rooms are kind of going on pause, but, you know, use your head, use some common sense. Like I said, even when the quarantine comes off, I don't know. I'd still kind of, I'd go slower than the live rooms will reopen. I think if, say, hypothetically, they open in 30 days, I might wait quite a bit longer before I start going back to live rooms. And I say that in the age group of I'm probably not going to have to deal too much with this. The mortality rate for my age is pretty darn low. But by the same token, a lot of the people that play live games are older, and I don't want to be responsible for getting anyone sick or hurting anyone in that capacity either. So just use your head, use some common sense, and, pay attention.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. We're not trying to make light of anything by talking about poker in the context of what's going on. It's just, what we all enjoy. And in this time, it's great to double down on your hobbies and, focus on things that can keep you occupied and grow your knowledge. And I think we both are in agreement that we're going to see a lot of people seeking out poker study, poker training material just out of necessity. This is the time to work on your game. If you're transitioning online, there are certain challenges there. And the topic of this week's podcast originally, and we will move on to it, I guess, here, is the workbook, because the poker workbook, it's not necessarily new, but it's something that you as a trainer have really pioneered and championed over your career. And, with everyone being kind of stuck at home, this is a perfect opportunity to study, and a workbook is kind of something that I think a lot of players discount, but it's a really effective way to get better, and wanted to talk to you about some ways that we can use workbooks to improve our game.
Yeah, so, whether you're at home quarantined right now or it's later and, just living normal day-to-day life, if you want to get better at anything, you have to practice. And you have to practice with a lot of focus, and it has to be intentional. And you really have to be focused on understanding what you should be working on right this moment. And the great thing about poker is you can do a bunch of that stuff between sessions. A lot of people, especially more recreational players, make it seem as if the only study you do is when you're playing. Right? You don't really think too much about poker between sessions other than, oh, hey, I wish I didn't lose that big pot. But shy of that, it's mostly their play time is also their study time, and it's all 100% overlapped. And that's not really the way you want it to be, because a lot of this game can be offloaded and studied in between sessions. That way, in real time, you can take some of that cognitive load off. You're not having to make some of those bare bones basic calculations at the table. You kind of have some of that stuff already pre-compartmentalized in your brain, so you can open that drawer and pull out the information you need without having to calculate it raw on the spot. And especially if you're playing online where you have a much shorter shot clock, you really have to be able to make some high level decisions very, very quickly. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're sitting there, using your fingers trying to figure out what the pot odds are. And I don't mean to say that rudely, these are just things that you have to learn. And if you put that time in between sessions, it does get infinitely easier. So that way you can spend your real time in sessions figuring out what the best line is to take. And are there any pieces of information that you can use to optimize your line further, rather than basic things like, hey, what are the pot odds? Or, hey, what does a 12% range look like? That's all stuff you should be working on between sessions.
Right. And your workbooks, they're really full of drills. It's the kind of thing where, yeah, you'll encounter these spots at the table if you play enough hands, but to get a few problems all in a line that all deal with the same concept and, maybe progress in difficulty, that's a real, way to study this stuff. You have to drill these skills over and over again. You can't just wait for them to pop up when they come up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because our brains are very, very pattern oriented, right? Our brains are constantly scanning for patterns and trying to put things together and figuring out where things line up. So the way that I design my workbooks, whether it's the hand reading ones or the prefop and math one, these are just things that by doing the drills, you start figuring out the patterns over time, and actually pretty darn quickly. And one of the things with designing a book like this is you kind of have to decide, okay, do I want to outline everything that the student is supposed to learn right this moment? Or is it more important for me to kind of lay out the groundwork, let them figure out those aha moments, because those are the ones that actually sink in much deeper. Think about anything you've learned in life. If you learned it on your own versus someone just spoon-fed it to you, the ones you learned on your own, the ones you put in a little bit of effort, the ones that you uncovered that first layer and you're like, oh, shoot, there's a gem under there. Those are the ones that stick much deeper in your brain. And that's what I'm trying to, through the workbook, help people uncover by doing some drills and some exercises. Oh, okay, there's the pattern. Oh, okay, now I can work on that. Okay, now that sticks much deeper. And again, then they can actually utilize it in real time much, much easier.
Absolutely. And, it's funny because there's a real life parallel here. Again, to bring it back to current events, New York schools are all shut down, and I'm homeschooling my first grade daughter. And so I learned very quickly the importance of having worksheets and having drills when teaching her something, because, you get that sense of, oh, you get this concept, you understand it, but that's just going to float away unless there's some drilling of that. And then that also exposes the areas where you maybe have weaknesses in your knowledge. It's just the best way to plug your leaks when you're learning a concept.
100%. And the good thing about poker is it actually doesn't really matter if you're playing cash games or playing tournaments when you're talking about like the bare bones basic math, right? A lot of people get really confused because they get stuck in like, this bet size in a tournament or this thing in a 10 NL game or this thing in a 500 buy-in game. Like they just get a little confused where it's like, okay, if you can just break everything down, start thinking about everything in terms of big blinds, percentages of pot, then all of a sudden these things get infinitely easier. So again, by doing those drills, you just start to kind of uncover like, okay, a raise of this size, which represents this percentage of the pot, turns out to look like this, that, and the other thing when you're looking at odds and, be it pot odds or implied odds or whatever it is. But you only get that by just drill, and it doesn't even take that much time. I mean, do 15 to 20 minutes per day, every day for a week or two, and you'll see like massive improvement in some of these things that were causing you confusion before. But if you don't do that work, like you're just not going to get it. Or at least you're not going to get it fast enough. Drills are very, very helpful.
And let's face it, a lot of people don't want to do the work, or they have some mental block. If you look at a lot of the other people offering poker training, they don't have a lot of these drills. They don't have tons of quizzes like we do in core, for example. Yep. But we've always prioritized that because, like you said, you want to teach people how to play poker better. You don't want to just fulfill a market need for someone who thinks they want to get better and wants to feel that way. We actually want to improve people's results, and there's no shortcut to that, as you've said over and over again, right?
Yeah, there really isn't. I mean, we can create super, super easy quizzes that just give you nonstop pats on the back, and that might feel good momentarily, but you're not going to learn all that much. Or we could do no quizzes and no drills, and that's really not going to allow you to put some of the theory that you've learned into practice and make sure that you're understanding it from both the micro and the macro level. So by doing this kind of work, like you said, most people will actively avoid it. And I think, honestly, the major reason why people do is people don't view themselves as strong at math. Right? They just kind of say, I wasn't that good at math in school. I've been out of school for a long time. I don't really want to have to learn math. This looks kind of scary, especially when you look at like advanced EV formulas and stuff like that. So I'm just going to avoid that and I'm going to be a field player. I mean, like that phrase drives me nuts. Like people are like, I'm not a math player, I'm a field player. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, maybe you can get your spidey sense going occasionally, and that will serve you sometimes. But poker is a game of math. And I promise you, if you don't believe me, just you have to take my word on it, or just do a little bit of the work and you'll start to see very quickly, like, this is a math game. This is not a pure feel game. Now, the thing is you can use tells and you can use information like that, and those spidey senses that you get, those are things that can inform variables, but it all goes right back to a mathematical equation. Everything you do in this game is rooted in math. So if you can front load that, I promise you can learn it. Like, it's really not that complicated once you put in a little bit of time. And with the workbook, I make sure that there's prelim sections of chapters that explain, okay, here's the big picture concept, here's the formula if it's needed, and then work you through how to do those kind of exercises. So that way you have a starting point and you can actually start getting these things. But if you don't do that, like, being a field player is not going to be a long-term thing for like 99.99999% of people. Can you make some money? Sure, because there are easy games where you don't need, a super advanced strategy in order to beat them. And that's not to speak unkindly of any games or any people. It's just, if you really want to start moving up, if you want to play against better players, if you want to hit your maximum win rate, you have to put in some time with the math. And you can, and you'll learn it, and I promise you can learn it. Just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of practice, but anything worthwhile in life is going to be that exact way, right? Nothing that's super, super lucrative is super, super easy. At least I can't think of too many things that are anyway.
Only no, I mean, a lot of interesting points there. I mean, one being that, that idea of being a field player, there's so many mistakes being made at the lower levels or like at your home game that you kind of almost can be convince yourself I'm a field player because that person is lifting up their cards and about to fold them before the action even gets to them, So yeah. That doesn't happen as you move up. You're going to find less and less opportunities if you're even going to go that route. But on the math side of things, I'm that person. Like, I'm that person who flunked calculus, who doesn't really think of myself as having a mathematical mind, but I approach poker as a strategy game. I think about it strategically and conceptually. So while I might not be able to explain to you how to calculate, certain formulas in poker, I at least understand the general concepts behind the formula. And every time I go back and study, the math becomes less and less scary. It becomes more and more just the application of the concept I learned. And like, there's nothing really that complicated in terms of like logarithmic anything, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And it really is simple once you run through a couple of drills with it. And again, you start identifying those patterns quite quickly. And I'll be totally honest, like, yes, I'm decent at math, but I wasn't always that way. I was very, very poor in high school. I passed, but it was like, you know, I wasn't like setting any records in math. And in college, I ended up taking the same class like twice because I am just a complete dum-dum. And like, it is what it is. But as soon as I actually started dedicating time and effort into poker math, because I was like, I have to learn this stuff, all of a sudden I actually started doing a little bit better in college math. It's like, oh, okay, all of a sudden stats started making at least a little bit more sense. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't ask me to calculate a z-score right this moment. I'm not even sure if I'm using that phrase properly, and honestly, I couldn't calculate it if you asked me to right now, unless you showed me a formula again. But, you know, you don't need that. You just need to run through some drills, run through some reps, start understanding how to eyeball it, and over time you get stronger and stronger with it. But it's a really, really important skill set, and it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. In fact, I think back to when my now wife, then girlfriend, I was at her place and we were talking about something, and she was getting ready in the morning. She's asked me how I thought about something, and I was kind of breaking it down. She's like, "What are you talking about?" Like, it's just like she didn't think the way that I thought. So I took out she had a big old mirror in the bathroom, so I took out a dry erase marker and I wrote down the formula for EV. And I explained what that formula was to her, and it's the simplified one, so it's a little bit simpler, not too many variables in it. And I said, everything that I do relates back to this formula. And I broke it down and I gave a couple examples, and all of a sudden she like kind of cocked her head and she's like, oh, I get that. Now, I don't think my wife's going to be calculating EV anytime soon, but you can understand the big picture of it and move forward from there. And that way you can start making better decisions. And as far as I'm concerned, that works both on and off the felt. And that's what I love about poker. Skills that you learn for poker translate very, very well to real life.
Yeah, and you got to get that feedback loop going of learning that new thing, connecting with someone else, or just connecting with your own game, being able to exploit someone else or plug your own leak. It's this positive feedback loop that keeps building, but you just got to take that first step into making the decision to study the game a little more seriously, as in picking up a workbook. So let's talk a little bit about the specific workbooks you have, because I may be wrong, but I think you have the most poker workbooks out versus anyone else, and you have several of them. What are the flavors?
So I have kind of two different flavors. One flavor is more hand reading oriented, and it's going to be 40 hand reading examples. So it's just 40 hands that play out kind of action by action and work you through the range building process. Now those are really more of kind of a free form thing. There's no answer key because it would be absolutely impossible for me to say, hey, here's the river range you should assign when I have no idea what the heck you assigned on any of the previous streets. So I just didn't include an answer key for those. I included some extra videos where I kind of walked through different examples from step by step. So those are including some of the higher level tiers of those products. But ultimately, those are very, very hand reading focused. So they're set up in 3 sections. And just for the record, those are hand reading, and there's 3 of them. There's one focused on live cash games, one focused on 6-max online cash games, and then one focused on final tables of tournaments. And each workbook is set up in 3 different sections. So the first 10 are you hand reading yourself. The second section is the thickest, and that's you hand reading your opponent. And then the third section is another 10 hands. This time it's range versus range. So the range that you think you would have in a spot versus the range you think your opponent would have in a spot, and looking at range advantage and equity comps and all that kind of stuff on a street by street basis. And the whole reason why I did these is because it's one, I think most people just don't have like a strong layout for practicing hand reading. They kind of say, okay, I'm going to analyze my own hand, but they're not 100% sure where to start. And then they start trying to hand read, but it kind of gets a little bit mucky from street to street. So I thought by using a workbook, it would kind of force you to say, okay, this is the range that I assigned on the street. Boom, I'm going to lock it in stone, and then I'm going to go to the next street with the next action. That way you don't get this like wishy-washiness where you're like taking hands and popping them over here, and then, oh, well, the king happened on the turn, so I'm going to like maybe put that in a different range now on like previous streets. I wanted to kind of like force you to take it in a really, really step-by-step logical approach. So that was that workbook. And the whole reason why I have you start with hand reading yourself is because most people don't really do that. They don't have much of a frame for what are their ranges, what would they do in a spot. And then based upon that, what do their frequencies look like on a street by street basis? Are you folding too much? Are you c-betting too much? Are you doing something 100% of the time or maybe only 10% of the time? Is your range really, really like super value heavy and like not nearly enough bluffs? And is that good or is that bad? And by doing these kind of exercises, you're going to start being able to take like really, really objective looks at those things. And that was kind of the point with those hand reading workbooks.
And you have a cool thing with those workbooks, right, where you can copy and paste ranges. Is that workbook?
Yeah, so that was the one where you have the templates where you can chunk all of your stuff on a street-by-street basis. In terms of the ones where you can copy the actual ranges, like the range strands that you could like copy and paste into like Equilab or Flopzilla or Poker Cruncher, that's the new workbook. That's the pre-flop and math workbook. And I am working on a post-flop version of that too, but that will probably be released like later in 2020. That's the tentative plan right now.
Cool. And is that all the workbooks, or did you have another math workbook?
So that's it right now. So those are the 4, and then the post-flop one, when that comes out, will make the 5th. And I don't know what's going after that. I'm kind of trying to play these things by ear to what do people want. I mean, really, the hand-reading workbooks were a direct response of people who really liked the hand-reading lab, and they were like, okay, I want to practice this. Or I liked the homework that was included in that course, and I think I want more. So I was like, okay, well, if people want more, then I can try to do that. And my major goal with the workbooks is that I wanted them to be very, very pretty. I think in poker, especially if you look at like a lot of poker books that are out there, they're kind of ugly, right? Bad typefaces and spacing's all wonky, and the hand reading or the hand examples, like the cards used, are kind of not so great. So I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that these not only felt good, like you wanted to open it up, you wanted to work through an exercise. It didn't feel like I'm opening this like 1984 textbook that's all math and no thank you. I wanted it to actually look really, really pretty. That was important to me.
I mean, it looks great. I mean, all
Thank
your
you.
stuff designed super well, super clear and easy to understand. And, you know, again, with that parallel to homeschooling now, I put a worksheet in front of my daughter that was like printed out from online and just a sheet of, you know, math problems, and saw her eyes looking at that. And then I put in front of her like the fully illustrated worksheet from like, you know, the published workbook. And she was looking at the pictures and drawing stuff on it. And so it's from a young age, we just love learning when it's much more visually compelling. And so much of math is just like you look at it and you want to run away. So thank you.
Yeah. Hey, it's my pleasure. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, I can make the same book and it could be ugly or it could be pretty. And if the pretty one encourages you to do, say, half more, then it's 100% worthwhile, right? And it's just, it takes a little bit more time. It takes actually quite a bit more time, especially with like layout and figuring out typefaces and spacing and all that kind of fun stuff. But at the end of the day, like if it helps you guys get better, that's all I really care about. You know, spending an extra couple of weeks on this kind of stuff, whatever. It's all good at the end of the day as long as people are learning from it and enjoying it and it's doing what it's supposed to accomplish.
It's so much fun to open a book and write those answers right there in the book. I love that.
Yeah.
So where can people get these workbooks now that we've explained all about why and what they are?
So we'll leave links to everything in the show notes. Do you know what number that's going to be? redshippoker.com/
See, we're on 185 or 86. I can't tell you for sure because we shifted them around a little bit.
We did shift them around a little bit. So one of those, just visit either actually, that's probably the best place. Go to splitsuit.com and in the main navigation, you'll see workbooks. Click on that and you'll see everything you need to see. So a lot of what we talked about today was the hand reading workbooks, but there's also the entire one that's pre-flop and math focused. That's the brand new one released the first day of 2020. And the entire focus on that is, of course, pre-flop focused and very, very math focused. It's going to run you through everything from EV examples from the simple side to the advanced side, pot odds, implied odds, 3-betting, squeezing, 4-betting, and all that fun stuff as well. And it's very, very focused on everyone. So there are cash game examples, there are tournament examples, there are 6-max examples, but at the end of the day, again, the whole point is to start thinking about things in terms of percentage of pot, in terms of big blinds, so that way you're well prepared to handle things. And I didn't want to make it super boring or make it just cash game focused, because some cash game players will play tournaments sometimes, and some tournament players will play cash sometimes. So you have to be able to think through these things very quickly and fluidly. And again, by doing some of that practice and that off-table work, this is the way that you're going to be able to do that much, much better.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking us through that. And again, your workbooks are great. There's really nothing like them out there. So I hope our listeners avail themselves of that link and check it out while we're all hunkered down and dealing with this situation. And we're going to keep you guys entertained and educated with the Poker Strategy podcast going forward. Anything to add?
No, I'm all good. Thank you so much. I hope people really enjoy them. And if you do end up getting them, whether it's the paperback on Amazon or it's the ebook via my site, just let me know how you like it. I really want to know how it's helping your game. Any suggestions you have for future editions or things that could be changed in the future. I love kind of hearing that feedback, both good and bad and constructive. So let me know what I can do. I love this kind of stuff. And hopefully you guys are staying safe, staying healthy, and getting a little bit better at poker in the meantime, especially if you need to still keep your brain sharp, getting a little bit tired of the isolation of the quarantining. Sometimes doing a couple reps, keeping your brain nice and sharp is a very, very good way of beating boredom.
Right on. And thanks for tuning in. Until next time, when we see you, be good.
Adios.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp, visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY, and get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.